We're still continuing our special coverage of Gaza ceasefire updates as Gaza begins a rare moment of respite after 15 months of unrelenting violence. A ceasefire agreement brokered by Egypt, Qatar and the United States is taking effect. An Egyptian source has reported that the process of handing over 3 Israeli detainees in Gaza begins. The ceasefire and detainee exchange agreement for Gaza has begun, with the first phase set to last 42 days. The truce was scheduled to take effect at 8:30 a.m. Gaza local time, but was delayed as Israel awaited the list of 3 detainees' names. Hamas affirmed its commitment to the agreement, attributing the delay to technical issues on the ground. Al Qahira News correspondent on the Egyptian side of Rafah has reported that 16 fuel trucks entered Gaza from Egypt. He also confirmed that 268 trucks carrying medical and food supplies have entered Gaza through the Karam Abu Salim, Al Auja and also Netzarim boarding crossings. This aid delivery coincides with the start and implementation of the ceasefire. Hamas has announced that it provided mediators with the names of the 3 Israeli women detainees it plans to release on the first day of the ceasefire agreement. The 3 women are Rumi Jonin, 24, Emily Damari, 28, and Doran Chattenberg Khair, 31, whose names were disclosed earlier by Hamas. The decision underscores Hamas's willingness to cooperate with mediators. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has confirmed receiving names of detainees expected to be released by Hamas, and the military informed families of those to be freed. Israeli media reported the ceasefire began at 11:15 a.m. Gaza local time, 3 hours late due to Hamas's delay in submitting the list. More detainees will be released alive within 7 days, with today's releases expected after 4 p.m. Gaza local time, which already took place. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has welcomed the implementation of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Trump emphasized the importance of diplomatic efforts in achieving lasting peace. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has received the Gaza Relief Early Recovery and Emergency Response Plan deployed by the Palestinian government. The plan, presented by Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa, focuses on the first 6 months post-ceasefire, aiming to address Gaza's emergency needs. It includes rebuilding infrastructure, restoring services and providing humanitarian aid in coordination with international organizations and UN entities. The plan also ensures support for displaced families and continuity in education for children. The Palestinian government is expected to hold an emergency meeting tonight to coordinate recovery and humanitarian efforts in Gaza. Ministries including social development, health and public works will collaborate with international agencies. Efforts will focus on rubble removal in coordination with the United Nations Development Programme, enhancing healthcare capacity and distributing aid. The water and energy authorities are addressing water supply and water waste issues. A post-meeting statement will outline the next steps of the recovery plan. UNRWA's Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini has announced that 4,000 humanitarian aid trucks, including food and flour, are ready to enter Gaza. Lazzarini hopes that attacks on convoys will decrease after the ceasefire. UNRWA remains committed to providing vital health care and education services in Gaza. The World Health Organization plans to deploy field hospitals within 2 months to address Gaza's health crisis. And after over 15 months of suffering in Gaza, a ceasefire agreement brokered by Egypt, Qatar and the United States is finally coming into effect. But can peace hold in Gaza?
A ceasefire has been reached in Gaza after more than a year of brutal conflict. The deal, brokered by Egypt, Qatar and the US, promises a halt in violence, but raises questions about its long-term sustainability. The ceasefire includes the exchange of detainees with nearly 2,000 Palestinians set to be released in return for 33 Israeli detainees. However, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Israel's military campaign is not over, and if the ceasefire breaks down, they will resume fighting with even greater force. This stark message indicates that peace remains uncertain, with a divided Israeli political landscape intensifying the situation. Protests in Israel highlight the deep divisions within the Israeli government and society. Egypt's role in negotiating this ceasefire has been pivotal. Alongside efforts to ensure the detainee exchange, Egypt has promised to send 608 trucks daily to Gaza, according to Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati. With Israel's political instability and Netanyahu's warnings, many wonder if the international community can hold Israel accountable and ensure that the ceasefire holds. Furthermore, the incoming administration of Donald Trump poses additional uncertainty for the conflict. Despite these challenges, the ceasefire provides a relief for Gaza. However, the road ahead remains fraught with difficulties. Can this ceasefire evolve into a permanent solution, or is it merely another pause in the cycle of violence? Only time will tell.
And now Qnews brings you, of course, live coverage of everything that's taking place on the Rafah border crossing, where, of course, there's transferring, an Egyptian source reporting transferring 3 Israeli detainees process in Gaza that is taking place, and the handing over is taking place in Gaza, which begins as breaking news, dear viewers, in a very historic day after, of course, 15 months of atrocities and genocides that took place towards the Palestinians. And for more analysis, we are joined from Cairo by Khalid Dawood, managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly. A very warm welcome, sir, on a very, of course, historic day. Welcome, Mr. Khalid Dawood, to Qnews and to our special coverage. Sir, the deal includes the release of around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, and the process of handing over the 3 female Israeli detainees agreed upon has started. How do you assess Israel's commitment to this exchange?
Well, thanks for having me. Of course, so far, so good in terms of the process of handing over the Israeli hostages. And what we're waiting for now is the release of nearly 95 Palestinian prisoners, mostly women and children. Unfortunately, the Israelis insisted on continuing their relentless bombing against Palestinians in Gaza, even though the truce was supposed to go into effect at 8:30 in the morning local time. They claim that they have not received the exact names of the three Israeli women hostages that are going to be released, and the result of this was continuing bombing of several civilian locations, leading to the death of 19 Palestinians.
Why, sir, do you think that Israel reacted after a ceasefire, long-awaited ceasefire, which already was dealt upon? Why do you think that Israel reacted like this?
Well, I guess it's mostly for domestic consumption. I mean, again, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been making it a big issue that he needs to receive the names and the exact identities of the three or whatever number of Israeli hostages that are going to be released. And of course, the message was to Hamas that if you did not keep your word about the strict implementation of the agreement, Israel will respond with the force. Again, which is, of course, a very worrying sign of what might come if for every single technical delay or problem that happens, we face this kind of Israeli mobbing. Of course, Hamas returned those allegations by saying that they have demanded relative quiet over the past 2 days so that they can make sure of the identities and bring the hostages to the places where they're going to be released. But the Israelis did not respond to this demand despite pressure from the parties sponsoring this agreement and continuing non-stop the bombing of the Israelis between Wednesday, when the agreement was announced, and up until 11:30 this morning, resulting in the death of nearly 140 Palestinians between Wednesday and today. So again, it's kind of the actions that are aimed for domestic consumption, considering the internal divisions within the Israeli government and what we've seen from the resignation of one of the most extreme ministers charged.
Okay, Mr. Khaled, sorry to interrupt you, but a few days ago I asked you about this ceasefire, and your answer was you were cautious. I want to know your feeling today, sir.
I think we have to remain cautious. The agreement is very detailed, very complicated, and again, the next step would be the beginning of the redeployment of the Israeli forces within the Gaza Strip. Please let me note that the Israeli Prime Minister did not make any encouraging statements yesterday when he actually started defying the agreement by claiming that Israel will not withdraw its forces from the so-called Philadelphia corridor, or the corridor separating the Egyptian and Palestinian border, even though the agreement clearly states that as of the first day of the implementation of the agreement, Israel should start redeployment of its forces in Rafah and finish withdrawing from there within 50 days. But the Israeli Prime Minister yesterday said that it's not only that he's going to keep the same number of troops, he's going to increase those number of troops, and he's going to maintain Israeli control over all the border of Gaza, whether with Egypt or with the rest of Israel. So that's indeed a very worrying sign, and the reason to remain cautious about what's to come, considering that the 42 days are a relatively long period of time in which it's going to witness at least...
Mr. Dawood, so you're still cautious.
Living hostages.
So you're still cautious, nothing has changed. Mr. Dawood, Egypt has played a crucial role in brokering this ceasefire. How has Egypt's involvement impacted the prospects for a lasting peace and stability in Gaza?
Well, speaking of a lasting peace is a very ambitious goal. But again, Egypt, Qatar, the United States have started launching immediately after the agreement was announced an operation room within Cairo in Egypt so that they can monitor the implementation of the agreement, and hopefully Israel will abide by the process of reporting any suspected violations from its side to this committee instead of resorting to immediate bombing and attacks against the Palestinians, and the same will apply for the Palestinian side. So, I mean, again, the Egyptian role is extremely vital and crucial for the success of this agreement in terms of monitoring the steps of its implementation. But also Egypt has another extremely important added burden, that of the flow of humanitarian aid, as you have just reported. Only immediately after the agreement went into effect at 11:30 a.m., we started seeing at least 268 trucks of aid, including a number of trucks with fuel getting into the Gaza Strip. The agreement is at least 600 trucks every day. So again, that's going to add to the Egyptian requirements from this agreement, because most, if not all, of the aid is going to go through the Rafah crossing point, and we already know that there are hundreds of trucks that have been waiting for months so that they can enter Gaza and provide the very much needed assistance to the Palestinian people.
Mr. Dawood, back again to your previous comment when you said, when you were discussing Benjamin Netanyahu's statements yesterday. How, sir, from your own perspective, did you read the narrative of Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu had to display the language of force, because, again, practically speaking, all the declared goals that he made at the beginning of the war against the Palestinians in Gaza have not been met. Hamas has not been totally eradicated. Hamas, of course, intentionally wanted to display force only hours after the agreement went into effect by displaying its fighters and their weapons within Gaza, and the restoration of the security services within the different Palestinian cities. So certainly Netanyahu did not succeed in eliminating Hamas military capabilities, nor its governing capabilities. It's still early to make this kind of conclusion, because we still have some time to go, depending on the attitude of the incoming U.S. President Donald Trump, who's going to take over tomorrow, and the U.S. willingness to put pressure on Israel and not just on Hamas in order to implement the agreement. So, I mean, again, Netanyahu had to display whatever kind of achievements he's made, the weakening of Hamas, the weakening of Hezbollah, working with a different kind of situation with the weakening of Iran as well. So he tried to make whatever accomplishments in front of his own public, who have basically been asking questions. Why wait for nearly 16 months before ending the war if the result is what we're seeing today, with Hamas remaining in Gaza and Hamas continuing to control Gaza?
Sir, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Israel's military campaign is not over, and said that the ceasefire will not come into effect when the announcement of detainees named Hamas planning to release was delayed. Given this stance, can this ceasefire truly hold?
That's what we hope for. Again, as I mentioned, I mean, a lot of effort has to be exerted by the incoming Trump administration. I hope that the incoming Trump administration is not just going to be satisfied with meeting his earlier promise that he's going to have a ceasefire before he gets into the White House, because, again, the process is long. The process of negotiations for the second stage, which is supposed to lead to a permanent ceasefire, starts on the 16th day of the agreement. And again, that will require definitely lots of pressure from the United States and on Israel, as well as effort to bring Hamas to compromise on some of its demands concerning the identities of the prisoners to be released and the redeployment of the Israeli forces within the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, it's very early to tell whether the agreement is going to hold, but so far the first day brought some relief to the Palestinian people in terms of humanitarian aid, and I hope that soon, within hours, we're going to see the release of the 95 Palestinian prisoners, followed by more and more Palestinian prisoners over the coming 6 weeks.
Okay, sir, as you mentioned, U.S.-elect Donald Trump, which takes office, of course, tomorrow, and we're all awaiting to witness this, of course, inauguration. Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned that the comeback of Donald Trump is a historic comeback for Israel and for Benjamin Netanyahu. Why does Benjamin Netanyahu read the comeback of Donald Trump as that supportive for Israel, whereas, of course, the Biden administration was one of the main allies of Israel and never, of course, gave up on Israel, and, of course, all the military aid that was given to Israel was through the United States, through the Biden administration. Why is he so happy about Donald Trump?
You are totally right about the Biden administration. Despite all the rhetoric and the talk about desire to reach a ceasefire, no practical pressure has been put on Israel. And as a matter of fact, the Biden administration has been super generous in providing Israel with weapons, over $25 billion that have been provided to Israel, including $8 billion just
exactly, sir. The last $8 million that he just decided suddenly out of the blue to give Israel before leaving the United States as the president of the United States.
$8 billion that goes to Israel just before the agreement. But again, Trump has also been very generous towards Israel and very violating of the international law during his first term when he recognized Israel's occupation of East Jerusalem, and he also recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. He has some ministers and top aides dealing with the Middle East issue who are known to be hardline Zionists, starting with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, and of course his ambassador, is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. He's actually a leading figure in supporting the settlement movement in the West Bank. His appointment as the U.S. Secretary to the United Nations, Liz Stefanik, she's also very hardline in supporting Israel. So again, that's among the main reasons why Trump feels that even if he agrees to the ceasefire in Gaza, he's going to get something in return from the Trump administration with all its hardliners. And my fear is going to be the compromises in the West Bank, allowing Israel to expand settlements in the West Bank, even recognition of the annexation of certain parts of the West Bank. That's a key danger that I fear the Trump administration will try to reward and satisfy Netanyahu in return for agreeing for the ceasefire and the beginning of the release of the hostages, including at least 7 American hostages.
Sir, do you think that Donald Trump had any role in this ceasefire?
Excuse me?
Do you think that Donald Trump played any role in this ceasefire?
Well, I'm afraid to tell you that it's Trump who made this agreement come true. I mean, again, judging that Biden has spent and his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visited the region 12 times and no results, no concrete agreement has been reached, even though the agreement that's been signed and agreed to on Wednesday is exactly the same agreement that Biden administration has put forward back in May. So you're talking about 9 months of wasted negotiations and lack of willingness on the Biden administration side to put serious pressure on Israel, unlike Trump, who clearly provided this message to the Israelis: you have to agree to this deal, despite its shortages from their point of view, and he wants to see this before he gets into the White House. So it was very serious language delivered by his new envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and I think all the reports coming out in the U.S. and Israeli media imply that the Trump pressure was a key factor in making this agreement possible.
True, sir. I just want to confirm with you that Trump made pressure. Mr. Dawood, what role can the international community play to ensure that this ceasefire becomes a stepping stone towards a permanent solution for Gaza, free from Israeli aggression forever?
Well, again, that's very ambitious, forever, and like a permanent ceasefire. We're still at the very early stages, but again, maybe a good start would be to adopt a resolution within the Security Council to make this agreement obligatory for the Israeli side, because at the end of the day, the Israeli side is the occupation force, is the one with the most advanced army in the Middle East region. So there's no way to compare the Hamas capabilities to Israel's capabilities, and that's why the international community needs to make this agreement formal through a UN Security Council resolution. The international community has a huge role to play in providing assistance, not just humanitarian assistance, but for the massive reconstruction plan that's going to be needed for the Palestinian side in Gaza to basically build everything in Gaza. Gaza has been totally destroyed, flattened to the ground. I mean, we've seen the infrastructure going down, water, electricity, sewage, hospitals, schools. Everything will need the support and the help of the international community. But as you mentioned, if I might quote your talk about, permanent solution, that would also require a restoration of the peace process so that we can, as President Sisi repeatedly stated, we can see a permanent settlement for the Palestinian issues through the creation of a Palestinian state, instead of repeating the same scenario over and over again with a war once every 4 or 5 years or whatever. So that's what the international community need to exert tremendous pressure to bring Israel to go back to the negotiating table and reach a permanent settlement for the Palestinian issue through the establishment of an independent Palestinian.
Mr. Dawood, Biden will deliver a speech today regarding the ceasefire. What do you expect from this speech in the last hours for Biden as President of the United States?
Well, to be very honest, I think Biden is history by now. I mean, whatever he's going to say, he's going to try to fix his record, trying to claim that he has played a major role, that all the details has been agreed by his team. But the reality is, starting tomorrow, there's a new America, there's a new president in town, and he is going to be setting the tunes. So whatever he's...
Mr. Dawood, like when he was asked in the press conference that did Donald Trump play any role in this ceasefire, then he watched back and answered, are you joking, and he left?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, he's trying his best to kind of improve his record and to maybe make some of his critics forget his description right now, which is widespread among the progressives in America, describing him as Genocide Joe, or the Secretary of State being described as Bloody Blinken instead of Anthony Blinken. So, I mean, again, this is going to be his final goodbye speech, expressing some good wishes on the need for the establishment of a Palestinian state, and that the Palestinian people also have their own legitimate rights. But that all rings hollow, because he had a chance throughout 16 months to prove that he can implement the words that he uttered, but his record is total failure in this respect, and he's definitely responsible for the death of over 50,000 Palestinians and the injury of over 100,000 people. That's all in his watch, and that's not something that's going to be ever forgotten by all those who support the Palestinians.
Okay, sir, then my conclusion of your answer now is that reality starts tomorrow. Mr. Dawood, the involvement of the United States has been key in brokering the deal. How do you think the incoming Trump administration will respond to the new dynamics in Gaza, especially in light of the reports that highlight Trump's intervention in reaching an agreement?
Well, again, I hope he means what he says, Mr. Trump, about his desire to see a permanent peace in Gaza. I'm extremely worried, again, because of his very hard-lying pro-Zionist team that he brought in with him, as I mentioned earlier. But also, I'm afraid that he also has many other international issues on his agenda, starting with the Ukraine war, and of course, a very lengthy domestic agenda, whether starting his mass deportation program, his own fights with America's neighbors, Canada and Mexico, let alone his plan to set very heavy tariffs on China. So my worry is that maybe the Trump administration will get very much busy with many other issues that might put the Palestinian issue on the back burner, and giving Israel the freedom to do whatever it wants in Gaza under claims of not meeting the agreement or violating terms of the agreement. But certainly we're not going to see an administration that's going to be very heavy in Israel if it came to delays and the implementation of this agreement, or failure to move from the first stage to the second stage. I don't expect, the Trump administration, judging by his previous record, to be the strongest or the strongest supporter of Palestinian rights.
Mr. Dawood, of course, it's worth to mention that Trump's priority is peace on every level globally, and Trump does not want to interfere in any war that's taking place, or, in other words, Trump wants to stop any war that's taking place. And it was out and loud when he said, if the exchange of the detainees does not happen before his inauguration, then hell will take place. This was his words, not my words, of course. Do you think, in light of this ongoings, Trump will involve himself in any wars that are taking place in the entire region and the Middle East, or he's going to back off?
Again, Trump loves the limelight. He loves to be seen as the peacemaker. Some people are even pushing and arguing that if he manages to reach a settlement in the Gaza, at least for a long time, he is going to be a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, something that's very unlike Trump, considering his very right-wing, hardline rhetoric on other world countries, on the Middle East. And again, he's the guy who presents himself as the best in reaching deals and making big deals that are likely to change history. So again, I mean, probably the kind of deal that he's going to try to promote as soon as he takes office is if things go well relatively in Gaza and there is a lengthy period of calm in Gaza and some sort of a step towards starting peace negotiations, maybe then he can go back again and push his normalization agenda, topped with normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and the Israeli side, and that would be, of course, a major achievement if he managed to do so. So probably he's going to be looking after, historic photo opportunities. He's going to be waiting for big deals worth billions of dollars, because I guess that's how Trump works. But again, the test is going to be in the coming weeks at least, and whether the truce for the first 6 weeks is going to hold, and then moving to the second stage, which is equally important, if not more important, because it will state that Israel should fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip, and then again move to the third stage, which is about the reconstruction plan that Gaza very much deserves. So we need to wait and see. Many things can change. The Middle East is never short of surprises, but again, many factors will be at play, and depending as well whether he manages to move ahead with the war in Ukraine and reach some sort of deal with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So it's a very busy agenda for Trump, but he's the guy who always claims that he's the best deal maker in one way or the other.
Okay, back again to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, sir, who in his speech yesterday, of course you understand and heard his narrative, when he decided to show as the one-man show that brokered the ceasefire, and it was fully his own decision to approve this ceasefire, and that if he decides to fight again and decides to hit again Gaza, when he decides he's going to move on, when he decides to, what are your expectations for the future ceasefire, with his own narrative and the means of him speaking, and of course the internal division that took place in his own cabinet, of course with ministers which resigned today, which are very important, of course, players in his cabinet. Would Israel try to seize any opportunity to resume its aggression, especially given the opposition to the truce within the government that led to the resignation of Minister Ben Gvir?
Well, I guess one of the key concerns for Netanyahu since this war started more than 15 months ago is to stay in office and to keep his coalition together, and more important, to avoid accountability. I mean, at the end of the day, the end of the war, if the war ended, which is not in Netanyahu's interest, is going to bring back again the calls for accountability over the October 7 attacks, in which he was prime minister. He's been a prime minister before the attacks for almost a year. So, and this is something that he's repeatedly said, that he's not going to start any serious investigation that might definitely hold him accountable for the October 7 attacks before the end of the war. So now there's going to be increasing calls for this accountability. He has his own legal trouble because of corruption charges that are being brought against him. He tried to avoid the trial as much as he can, whether because of political and military conditions or his own health condition after undergoing surgery. So, I mean, this is going to be another matter of concern to him. Generally speaking, one of the key fears and one of the key charges that the opposition made against Netanyahu is that he dragged on with this war in order to continue staying in office. So now, one of the key questions after this truce, especially if it holds, whether we're going to see some internal Israeli divisions and infighting that might lead to new elections, and perhaps seeing a different prime minister than the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That's definitely one of the issues of concern and priority for the current Israeli Prime Minister, whether he's going to prove again to be the most skillful politician in Israel's history, able to overcome all obstacles and maybe drag this government until 2026.
This again, please.
We're going to see elections in this year.
Could you repeat what you said again, please?
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat the last part again?
No, I'm just stating, I mean, it's a very critical year for Netanyahu if he is going to manage to drag this government up until 2026 when elections are due to take place, or whether these internal pressures and call for investigations and accountability is going to result in some sort of new elections happening this year, and that's definitely not going to be in Netanyahu's favor or in the favor of his extremist hardline coalitions. You mentioned that Ben Gvir resigned, but probably Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, did not resign because opinion polls show that he's not going to win enough seats to get into parliament again. So they have a keen interest in keeping this government together and keeping this extreme right-wing coalition in government in Israel. Whether Netanyahu is going to withstand the internal Israeli pressure is another key challenge for the Israeli Prime Minister.
Mr. Dawood, I know I've been asking you this question on and on, but just to make sure which grounds we're standing on at this point. What are your expectations again for the future ceasefire? Would Israel try to seize any opportunity to resume its aggression, especially given the opposition to the truce within the government that led to the resignation of Minister Ben Gvir?
Well, I think that at least for the first 6 weeks, because those are very critical weeks in which mostly...
you said the first 6 weeks, sir.
The first 6 weeks of the truce, yes, the first 42 days of this truce are going to be very important because they are going to witness the release of the biggest group of Israeli hostages. As you know, there are around 98 Israeli hostages held so far by Hamas. Only 60 are believed to be alive, while the rest are believed to be dead, mostly by Israeli bombing of Palestinian cities and towns in Gaza Strip. So again, the expectations, even within Israel itself, is that the first stage of the truce, the 42 days, are likely going to last. But then the question will remain whether the Netanyahu is going to bow to pressure from his extremist ministers, such as Smotrich, to resume fighting after the first stage of 42 days or 6 weeks. That's going to be one of the key challenges. The fate of the negotiations over the second stage that's supposed to start on the 16th day of the current phase of the truce is also going to be another key element. So, but again, at least for the next 6 weeks, I expect that the agreements hopefully will go through, and we're going to see more exchanges each Saturday for the coming 6 weeks, starting with the living Israeli hostages, women, elderly, children, and 3 or 5 women soldiers who are going to be exchanged for at least 250 Palestinians with heavy sentences issued against them, some of them with so-called blood in their hands in the Israeli definition. So again, that's going to be important for the Israeli side, for the American side. But again, the key test is going to be moving from the first stage to the second stage and reaching a permanent end for the war in Gaza.
Mr. Khalid, yesterday a plan by the Palestinian presidency was, of course, reported that it was a statement, actually, and I think you heard of, after the ceasefire, that they're going to be adding security administrations and other administrations. How do you read this, sir?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, an Israeli statement or a Palestinian statement, but again, one of the key challenges for sure, the question that remains unanswered today, until today, which is about the day after. Who's going to be responsible for running Gaza after the truce takes effect? Of course, Hamas displayed its muscles today by showing that it remains to be capable of controlling the Gaza Strip, displaying the weapons of its fighters, and restoring the security services in parts of the Strip. But again, the issue of...
Mr. Dawood, sorry to interrupt you. You heard me when I told you the statement was made by the Palestinian presidency, sir?
Yes, so thank you that it confirms my answer that the key challenge for the Palestinian presidency would be reaching this agreement with Hamas on the day after, who's going to be responsible for running Gaza. And they have to reach agreement with Hamas about this because Hamas is not going to evaporate or disappear. And that's one of the key problems that have been facing the agreement. Again, the Israeli Prime Minister has repeatedly said he's not going to allow Hamas to continue ruling Gaza, that he needs to see a new government in Gaza. But at the same time, he made the situation very difficult by saying that he also doesn't accept the Palestinian Authority to become responsible for the Gaza Strip. So going back to his original...
Sir, isn't the Palestinian Authority and a Palestinian government concrete at this point of negotiations and at this point that we've reached to after the ceasefire?
Well, Egypt has been playing a very key role in hosting those kinds of negotiations between Fatah and Hamas over the past few months. But so far, we haven't seen indications of a near agreement because, again, at the end of the day, I think it's not going to be the decision of Hamas and Fatah alone. Many regional players and international players are going to be involved, and definitely Egypt, Qatar, the United States will have, as well as other Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, will also have some say in kind of bringing a new Palestinian government in office so that the international community would make sure that we now have an effective Palestinian government in place that would not only negotiate over reconstruction of Gaza, but the more complicated aspect of agreeing to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state.
Sir, with Netanyahu's comments about potentially resuming fighting if the ceasefire fails, how likely is it that Israel will honor its commitment to this agreement, sir?
The Israeli record is negative. I mean, we are not sure about the Israeli commitment to ending the fighting. Netanyahu is an extremist, as well as his ministers who are trying to push hard, even not just for the reoccupation of Gaza and the banning of humanitarian aid, but they are even pushing for restarting the settlements, again, the illegal settlements in the Gaza Strip as the situation was before 2005. So, again, it's not something that Israel has proved to have a positive record on, even judging by the recent agreement that was reached between Lebanon and Israel to end the war by the end of November. We already see the various Israeli violations. So violations are expected, but I also think Hamas will be under a lot of pressure from its own domestic community not to resume the war, even if Israel violated the agreement through carrying out targeted attacks or targeted killings, but probably not during the first phase of the 40
Mr. Khalid, of course, after all this coverage, and I thank you so much. How do you read today, sir? Do you read it as a historic day, or you're still cautious about it? That was Khalid Dawood, managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly. Dear viewers, of course, as you're watching, Qnews is continuing its special coverage of Israel and the ceasefire agreement that reached between Israel and Hamas, of course, brokered through the United States and Cairo, Egypt, of course, and Qatar. In Doha, Israel will receive we're awaiting and you're watching. Israel will receive the 3 detainees through the Nazarene crossing. And you're watching Qnews and we'll be with you minute by minute coverage to cover all that's taking place in this very historic day, dear viewers. That brings us to the end of our special coverage for this hour. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.